This episode of the Nevers Podcast is sponsored by Dead Good Teas, aficionados of the sci-fi and horror genre and creators of premium heavyweight t-shirts and hoodies that are built to last. Dead Good Teas ships worldwide, so whether you're braving the Arctic winds of the Yukon or strolling the beaches of beautiful Thailand, Dead Good Teas has you covered. Thank you to Dead Good Teas for supporting quality podcasting. Start shopping today at deadgoodteas.co.uk. And don't forget, you can follow them online at Dead Good Teas.
This is a Culture Inject production.
On the Nevers Podcast this week, we've got a very special episode produced by myself, Kelly, and it's about the monstrous women of Buffy the Vampire Slayer. I have my co-host, Gina, here today, and I have a special guest, which I will announce in a couple of minutes. So right now, we want to remind you to follow us on our website, hbothenevers.com. We're also on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube at HBO The Nevers. You can stream and download the Nevers Podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, SoundCloud, and anywhere you can find podcasts. And of course, our newly launched Patreon. So it's patreon.com/join/the Nevers Podcast. Please join us. So yes, our special guest today, I'm so happy to introduce her, is Jessica from the Spinsters of Horror, my other project.
Hi, everyone.
And we have a podcast. It's called I Spit on Your Podcast. So yeah, Jess, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, as Kelly said, I am Spinster number 1 on the Spinsters of Horror, our website, as well as co-host on our podcast, I Spit on Your Podcast. And yeah, that's what I do.
You also do a lot of writing for the website. It's kind of become a new passion of yours, I think.
That is very true. It's funny how I started out a long time ago with creative writing and didn't think I would ever be able to contribute to the horror community with my own writing. But yeah, it's become something where I'm quite energized about and get really excited about writing about things. Even though it takes me forever, the writing process, it eventually works out.
I think it's worth it in the end.
Thank you.
All right. So what's your history with Buffy the Vampire Slayer? I mean, I know, but Gina doesn't know, and these listeners don't know. So please share your Buffy history with us.
Oh, yeah. So my Buffy history is actually started out with the novelization of the movie. So I read the actual novelization of the original movie with Christy Swanson. No, Swanson? Yes. And then I watched the movie and became obsessed with the movie. And then it wasn't until I met Kelly, years later. I was a young girl at the time when I read the book and watched the movie. And then Kelly would talk all about Sarah Michelle Gellar and the series itself, the Buffy the Vampire series. And I was very hesitant to watch it. Actually, no, very resistant. I resisted watching it for a very long time. And a little bit of a thing of contention between Kelly and I, because she was always all about Sarah Michelle Gellar as Buffy, and I was all about Christy as Buffy. So, but then it took some time, and then I think it was just, I don't know what changed. Something just kind of switched. And I think I was just kind of going through a really hard time in my life, and I was watching Xena, and because that's my go-to for this type of I need female empowerment. And finally I just you know what, fuck it, I'm gonna watch some Buffy. And I did, and I haven't stopped. I think I've rewatched the series over and over, just because it's such a fun show. It's something that you get empowerment from, but you also get to really just enjoy a great variety of characters. And so yeah, that's kind of how it changed so much later in life for me.
That's great. Buffy gets, I think, new fans every single day. You know what I mean? Despite what age you're at, if you're a teenager now, you're an adult now, she just keeps, I think the show keeps growing in fandom, which I think is pretty amazing.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, so what are some of your favorite characters?
So some of my favorite characters are Anya, and that's actually more recent for me. After my third or fourth watch around, I'm just yes, I love Anya. Giles. Giles is I like Giles. I like Willow. Those are like my three main characters that I like the most. I do like Buffy. Like, I obviously like her as well. But, you know, and Faith, too. So there you go. So there's some, you know, but those are like, the top three are like Willow, Anya, and Giles.
Amazing. Amazing. And how about, last question, how about your favorite season or favorite seasons?
My favorite season is, oh gosh, I'm trying to think. I almost feel like I might say something wrong because of our last podcast. People were like, you're wrong. You said it was favorite. I think season Hush is in season 4, right? Yes. Season 4, because it has a lot of really good episodes in season 4 that I really like. And season 5 has some really hard hitting episodes. But I also love season 7.
Excellent. Good. Yeah. Good variety there.
Yeah.
Excellent. Okay. And Gina, we haven't heard from you in so long.
Seriously, man. I will keep this short because there's like a million things. One of my favorite things that have happened recently is, I don't know if you guys have ever seen BoJack Horseman, but sadly it's ending. Season 6 is the last season. And there was an event at the Writers Guild in LA, and it had the season 6 writers room, and it had the showrunner Raphael Bob Watsberg. And I went with my sister and my friend, and we all got to meet the entire writers room, and I took a picture with the showrunner, and it was incredible. Yeah, one of the best memories I've had recently. So yeah, if you haven't seen BoJack Horseman, please do. I believe Tague, the other co-host of ours that's not on this episode, but he is also obsessed with BoJack Horseman. We've been messaging each other ever since the last season ended. So please, it is one of the best things I'll ever watch. There's been, I hate overhyping things, but there's been so many articles saying that it's like the best show of the last decade. And I completely agree with that. So
it's a really hard hitting show. I just finished watching it as well. Like, it just, yeah.
It's so good.
It's good. It's good. It's just really realistic and really emotional.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's crazy, right? It's an animated cartoon show and the main character is a horse, but it's so, I always tell people it's more realistic than any other live action show that's on right now. And it's about a horse that's a cartoon. Like, so good.
Well, no surprise to anyone here. I have not seen it. So heard of it, never watched it.
I highly recommend it.
I will say, I think I saw on your social media that you're starting a cinematography class.
Yeah. I'm so excited about it. So I've been really focused on screenwriting the past few years. I'm also a singer-songwriter, but screenwriting has been my main thing. And I was like, recently, I'm like, you know what? I was a theater major. Like, I know how to direct actors, so I should try directing. So I've directed a few short films, but I'm like, I would love if I knew how the cinematographer's mind works so I could properly speak to one so I don't sound like I don't know what I'm talking about. So I'm like, you know what? I'm going to take a cinematography class because I don't want that to be in the way of any short films or films that I create. So yeah, it feels like a life-changing class already, and it just started. So I'm really, really excited.
That's amazing. I'm excited for you. It seems really interesting. My partner he went to film school and whatnot, and he's like a videographer, cinematographer. He's done some directing, and I think it's helpful to kind of know what each role is and be kind of multi-talented, and you kind of you can at least slip into different roles. Pardon me, at least understand where everybody's coming from. And I think that's super helpful as far as I can tell from somebody who knows nothing about film.
No, exactly. And I never want to be that director that, just focuses on the actors and totally forgets about the rest of the crew. So yeah.
Excellent. Okay. Yeah, I have nothing to share right now necessarily besides part of my 2020 goals for Spinsters of Horror, Jess and I's other project, was to gain more exposure for us and get us on a podcast network. And I got us on a podcast network.
Yes,
so
you did.
It's only February of 2020.
Yeah, so ahead of your goals.
I'm so far ahead. I checked that off the list very early and it felt very good. So there's that.
Yay.
Thank you. Okay, moving on. So we now have subscribers in over 18 countries, including Canada, the United States, El Salvador, Brazil, Chile, Australia, New Zealand, the UK, Germany, Slovenia, Italy, and France, just to name a few, which is really cool. We'd love, obviously, to get on into more countries. So if you're a subscriber of the Nevers podcast, please share our show with your friends and family and everyone you know so we can continue to grow our audience. We'd love to get listeners in India, China, and Scotland, places like that. So please spread the word. Next up, we're going to get into the news. Well, not really news, but in a recent sit-down with People Now, Allison Hannigan opened up about her chemistry read for Buffy the Vampire Slayer and how she thought she blew it. She said, "I walked into a door and forgot all my lines. I had done the same lines for about 8 callbacks, and for this particular time, it was a chemistry read with me, Sarah, and Nicholas. Joss wrote a new scene especially for this audition, and it was all this computer stuff. My character was very computer savvy, and it was all this computer jargon. We got to that part and the words just all started swimming, and I don't think I was speaking English," she added. Joss later told me that you couldn't say the words to save your life, but I knew right then and there. So Allison's new show called Girl Scout Cookie Challenge premiered on the Food Network the night of February 3rd, which is pretty neat. I know, Gina, you had some thoughts on the casting of Allison Hannigan in a different episode of the Nevers podcast, but maybe just throw this to Jess for a moment. Willow's your favorite character. Obviously, Allison Hannigan plays Willow. Could you imagine anybody else playing her?
No, I couldn't imagine anyone else playing Willow. Like, just Allison Hannigan brings just a very different, unique personality to that character that is just kind of like I've seen a couple episodes of How I Met Your Mother. And just like you can almost seem like as she's acting is like, oh, there's like little elements of Willow in there, that awkwardness and that kind of like, you know, like I'm a superhero as well, not just her sidekick kind of like a personality. So yeah.
Have you ever watched the unaired Buffy pilot?
No, I have not.
No, neither have I. I know it exists on YouTube. So it's very easy to watch, but I just have not done it. But during that unaired pilot, they had a different actress playing Allison Hannigan. So
okay, that
might be interesting to check that out.
Yeah,
I love this story about the chemistry read because in a weird way, I'm sure Allison forgetting all the lines and like having trouble with the computer jargon, it must have been kind of charming and like it kind of fits Willow's energy. So even though obviously Willow would understand like all the computer jargon, I'm sure obviously Joss wasn't really focusing on that part because he knew that she'd be able to get it. He was probably just focusing on like, how does she fit with Sarah and Nicholas? And I'm so happy that, I mean, Joss is an intellectual, so of course he cast them, but I'm really happy about it.
Yeah, she was probably super awkward, which was perfect.
Exactly.
Okay, our next bit of news. Dennis O'Hare was recently interviewed by the French outlet Binge, where he shared some new insight into this character, Dr. Edmund Haig. O'Hare had the following to say: "It's a wild Victorian X-Men meets Sherlock Holmes meets girls with superpowers mashup. And I play a delightful scientist, and in my very first episode, I get to sing." So, of course, when I saw Sherlock, I thought, I'm going to throw this to Gina because I'm sure she has thoughts on this.
Okay, so anyone that's known me, I was a huge BBC Sherlock fan, but besides BBC Sherlock, I'm a huge Sherlockian. So I've read a lot of the original stories from Arthur Conan Doyle. My sister and I have a published novella, and it actually takes place in Moriarty's perspective. And we've written songs about Sherlock. We've played at the official BBC Sherlock convention in Los Angeles. Like, Sherlock's my life. And my sister and I are currently writing a pilot for an original idea for a Sherlock show. So anyway, obviously I love Sherlock, and something that I probably haven't mentioned too much on the podcast is that I also love X-Men. I know a lot of people have different views on the recent X-Men films. I personally love them. I personally think Simon Kinberg is a genius, and I've also met him a few times, and he's a screenwriter. So when Dennis O'Hare said it's X-Men meets Sherlock Holmes, and then he kept going and was like, meets girls with superpowers. I'm like, seriously, this sounds like my ultimate dream, and somehow this is happening. Like, I don't know how it's happening, but it's happening, and it just so happens that Joss Whedon is creating it. So I don't know. It's like four things that I love combined, and then he says he has a singing scene. Are you kidding me? Like, oh, I can't. I can't.
Jess, I think you're a bit of an X-Men fan. Is that correct?
Yes, I am a fan of Dennis O'Hare. I'm a fan of X-Men. And I'm also a fan of Sherlock Holmes. So
amazing. Okay. What are your thoughts on this little tidbit?
Well, I'm excited to hear that Dennis O'Hare is in the Nevers. Like, just because I love him as an actor. I just think he's great. He plays his characters so well in American Horror Story, and I remember him from True Blood, and every time I see him in something else, I get very excited to see him because he's just so great. So X-Men meets Sherlock Holmes. That's going to be super interesting because, I'm like a huge fan of like the original comic book series and the 90s cartoon. Fan of the first couple of the movies, and the last bit I have some like... I want to love the last few X-Men movies. It's just they keep trying to do the Dark Phoenix saga, and like that story is so important to me, the Dark Phoenix, and it just doesn't seem to go well each time. So I get so put off by it. So, but yeah, I'm excited to see it. And yeah, I was the same way. I was a fan. I've read a lot of the original Sherlock Holmes when I was growing up as a kid, and also I did really like the BBC series until I got bored with it.
Until series 4.
Yeah, exactly, right. And I just stopped watching. I just like, you know what, the first 2 seasons were amazing, and I can't do this anymore.
Again, no surprise to anyone, but I haven't seen much of X-Men and Sherlock Holmes related things, so the fact that it's a wild Victorian mashup of women with superpowers, very into that. So that's fine with me. And the singing, so do you think, not that I think that this is going to have like a musical element to it, but maybe that's a portion of that character that he likes to sing? It's interesting.
That's so interesting. And it makes me think, like, I doubt there's a musical episode in the first season, but like, is there just a song in the episode? Like, that's so fascinating to me. Or like you said, he could just be singing like a cappella, and that's just part of his character. But regardless, it already sounds like fresh and new, and not many shows do that, you know?
Yeah. Maybe sounds a little bit playful too, so it's not going to be super serious all the time, which I think Joss does really well, so maybe. Our next bit of news. Cinematographer Seamus McGarvey has departed the production after 2 episodes. McGarvey served as the show's DOP, director of photography, for the season's first 2 episodes. Listeners might be familiar with McGarvey's work, which include 2012's period piece Anna Karenina, apparently a film that Josh shares an affection for, and which introduced him to his future MCU Quicksilver for Avengers Age of Ultron film, Aaron Taylor Johnson. That gentleman also did Atonement and the upcoming Pinocchio. So it doesn't come as much of a surprise that he tapped into McGarvey to work alongside him once again for the first 2 episodes of this new Victorian drama. Joss is very likely directing the first 2 episodes himself before handing the reins to other directors for the intermediate episodes before returning to direct more in the future. So it's pretty neat. I don't really have any thoughts on that. I did like Age of Ultron, so cool. But not the other movies. I'm sure he's done a fine job.
When I first heard about this news, I literally started freaking out and got really sad because I'm like, no, he's leaving it. But then it hit me. I'm like, no, he's just doing the first 2 episodes. It's not like he like was supposed to do all of them and then just left.
Excellent. So, gonna get into the discussion today on the themes of today's episode. And this is part 1, folks. We will definitely have a part 2 that I really hope Jess comes back for.
Please.
We'll see how today goes.
If you invite me, yes. Okay. Ooh. This is like my audition? Okay.
And folks, tell us in the social media how she does. So the first woman up for discussion is Veruca, the female werewolf.
My skin.
You know what I am.
You wouldn't know me now.
You've known since the first time you saw me.
Couldn't you go away?
Right before sunset, I get a little buzzed, you know?
Come here.
I'm not getting in that stupid cage with you if that's what this is all about. We belong outside.
can't run loose tonight. And not just because you might hurt somebody. I know people that'll be out there hunting for us.
So you're saying I should spend the whole night with you, alone, locked in a cage?
And folks, there are a couple of women that we're going to talk about today that I wrote some blog posts on our website. So a little bit of the discussion will be related to those two. So I'm going to throw a question out to you two, Jess and Gina. First, what were your first impressions of Veruca when she was introduced to the show?
Ooh, that's a good question. So I haven't rewatched a lot of her episodes in a while. But okay, I love conflict. I'm sorry, I love conflict so much. When I watch Buffy with other people, sometimes they obviously hate it and they start yelling at the screen. In the back of my head, I'm like, yes. So I probably didn't hate Veruca as much as a lot of other people. And yeah. I actually found it really fascinating that she was different than Oz, that she treated herself as a werewolf differently, and she had different feelings and thoughts about it. And I found it fascinating too that, like, of course I love Oz and Willow together, but I also found it fascinating that Oz had this kind of primal feeling for Veruca, and it is very different than her and Willow's relationship. So I don't know. I was all about it. Obviously, again, it broke my heart that Oz and Willow broke up. I love them so much together. They're so beyond cute and so perfect. But again, I love conflict. So sorry about it.
How about you, Jess?
Well, when I very first watched the series, I was of the majority of people who are like, I don't like Veruca. She broke up Oz and Willow. You know, she kind of got in there and was kind of like, you know, very upfront about it, and too, like that she knew, she made it aware. Sorry, pardon me. She made it very clear what her intentions were, regardless of what people were feeling. So I just remember at the beginning not liking her, and it wasn't really, Kelly, until you like started talking about Veruca and I was helping you with your blog posts and stuff like that, that I was like, oh, seeing Veruca in a very different light, and how, you know, and how she was treated, and then how typically how monstrous women are treated by the Scoobies throughout the series.
Right, thank you. And so as we know, Veruca has, kind of the exact opposite thoughts and feelings about being a werewolf. She is, you know, she kind of takes it to, unfortunately, a very dark place. But I feel like she kind of owns it. She understands that, you know, I am a werewolf. I have all of this extra power. And, you know, just a thought now, but I would wonder if Veruca would be have such a presence if she wasn't a werewolf. But I have a feeling there's probably, I mean, she's only the wolf, as we know, 3 days out of the month, or are we all the time? We'll get to that later. But, you know, I think she just has that allure, and we see that in that, I think, one of the first episodes of her, she's singing in her band Shy. At the Bronze, we have Giles, Oz, and Xander just taken aback and just kind of in awe. She kind of exudes this primal feminine energy that those men kind of just really fell for, you know?
Yeah.
And for me, I just feel like Veruca, and I talk about that in the blog post, but she just embodies like absolute just like power, agency, femininity. And she's also very overtly sexual and very aggressive in that way, which is very opposite of Willow. And we see Willow, you know, being feeling very insecure of this. And like I talk about in my blog post, it's women, like Jess mentioned, in Sunnydale, when you kind of look back, like take a step back and look at everything, if you are outside of the norm, then you don't belong. You are not going to be accepted. You are other, you know, you have to be put down, so to speak. What are all your thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. Like, your blog post definitely also opened up my eyes to a whole other side of Veruca that I didn't really think about at first thought. What I liked about it, and maybe it's just because like it was my experience personally in high school, is that like I was very much like Willow when it came to relationships. So of course, like, okay, this is like TMI, but ex-boyfriends of mine have cheated on me with women that, you know, were a lot more like sexual than me. And so I find it really realistic. But I could also understand if you didn't have that viewpoint when you were in high school, it does seem like Veruca is obviously made out to seem like the bad guy or a bad character because she's overly sexual. So yeah, I don't know. I think it's really interesting. And that's one of my favorite things about art is that everyone can see it differently depending on what they've been through in life. And I don't know.
And I think that's why, like, when I first watched those episodes with Veruca, I identified with Willow because I was like, that's me. Like, whenever another woman comes around, I instantly feel insecure and feel threatened, and that my partner is going to like that person more because they look more confident and they're more, you know, confident in who they are and their sexuality, and they, you know, and men could be attracted to that, right? And so I remember watching that and feeling very, you know, almost like I feel threatened for Willow. But at the same time, too, though, just you like looking at the other side of it, it's like, well, Veruca just may look confident, but she may not necessarily be confident. That's just how she is dealing with things in the world, and how, you know, and that sometimes that's that element of when women turn against women, right? Because like, oh, well, I feel insecure. Well, just because she's acting very confident does not mean that she feels that confident. That's just how she survives and goes and gets through the world as well. And so that's where, like, when reading Kelly's blog post and rethinking about the character of Veruca again, I was like, okay, so yes, so she may be owning her sexuality and stuff like that, but she's also like, she was changed into a werewolf. That there's a sense of comfort or confidence that is a bit shaken by that because you don't know really where you belong in the world.
That's a really wonderful point. And I have to say, when I first watch it, I don't identify with Willow in that case. Maybe I'm the Veruca. Probably am. I think about me going on to first dates and, you know, having a beer and a shot and showing a lot of skin and men being very intimidated. Like, who is this woman that is asking me to kiss her? And just like, I'm very forthright in my
the total opposite of me. 8 hours later, you get a kiss.
You know, and I read this really wonderful, I'm kind of obsessed with it now. And Gina, you might be into it. I should send it to you. But it's called Hairy Thuggish Women, Female Werewolves, Gender, and the Hoped For Monster by Elizabeth Clark. I'm trying to seek this woman out because I just really loved her analysis and like kind of research into female werewolves overall.
Yeah, that's
really
cool.
neat. Yeah, it talks about like queer monsters, and there's even like a whole queer element to it that I didn't necessarily want to get into here, but it's really fantastic. But she does make a point of, you know, Veruca's as an example of an unlivable monster. She's an unlivable woman. And, you know, she doesn't adhere to our proper codes of femininity and being a woman. Also, a portion of that is because she's a werewolf. You know, traditionally a male kind of dominated role, but she also, because of being a werewolf, portrays a lot of masculine traits. We get very furry and hairy, aggressive, we're violent, you know, we're very just vulgar, and, you know, she kind of takes that onto herself, and she gets power out of that. But obviously that's not how a woman should be. So in the Sunnydale universe, you got to be put down, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. You need to be wearing pastels and live in suburbia.
Yes. Yep.
And it's interesting too, because is she just seen as a villain because it's different than Willow? You know, I don't know if it was, and again, I could be so wrong, but I don't know if it was the writer's intention to make Veruca seem like a villain just because of her traits. I personally feel like she's just a villain because she's the opposite of Willow. Like, if we had a main character that was Veruca, Willow would be the villain. So it's interesting. It could have been the writer's intention to make her a villain, or it could just be because it's like, you know, the opposite of Willow.
I also think it's interesting too that here we are, like, we're talking about how Veruca comes in and she breaks up Oz and Willow, but at the same time you're like, whoa. We're forgetting about the agency of Oz. He is just as much as has the ability to decide what he wants to do or not. And so, he was just as responsible for his actions as Veruca was for her. And I always think it's interesting that we always tend to forget that sometimes when it comes to these type of situations, when like someone else comes into the picture and like, when a partner leaves and stuff like that. And they're like, oh my God, the other woman is because she did this and this. Is like, he was just as responsible for his actions as well too. So
yeah, totally.
As they say, it takes two to tango.
Exactly. Yeah.
It takes two to wolf out and bag. It's very true. He did not act accordingly, nor was he honest with himself or what was going on there. And that actually is a great point, Jess, because it reminds me of when Willow comes in to meet him in the, like, get him breakfast and coffee that next morning, and he said, I had no choice. It's like, yes, you did. You could have told someone, but you locked her in a cage with you. And then Veruca says, girl's got a point. And I was like, yes.
Willow.
Oh my God. Oh my God.
I know what you saw. It wasn't... I had to lock her in there with me.
I bet.
She's like me, a wolf.
Well, I knew you two had a lot in common, but... Don't touch me!
She was gonna hurt somebody. I didn't have a choice.
But you did. You could have told somebody. Your solution? Just put you two together in a room all night? Girl's got a point.
Leave.
I'm just saying.
Sorry.
I knew, you jerk. And you sat there and you told me everything was fine?
But you thought with something that was not your brain, and look what happened.
Oh boy! Right? And so when we all we don't turn against Oz, right?
No.
Like people are upset that he breaks up with Willow and he leaves, and we're like, oh well, but when I was doing Google searches, like just to see like what do people say about Veruca, and everyone is angry about her, and they were happy that she dies and departs because she broke up Willow and Oz, and it's
God.
Okay, that's very unfair.
Yeah,
it's totally
that's a really
unfair.
good point.
It's totally unfair. And also, look at her. She's such a slut, let's say. And, she's done this, but it takes, it was definitely his doing. She didn't really, I think, at first initiate everything. They found each other as werewolves out and about.
Yeah.
And it happened. So I had a question is, and I brought it up in the blog post as well, is like, why didn't she become an ally instead of being a villain? I mean, it would have been really great to have another werewolf character and just learn more about it. I mean, she has an interesting kind of ideology behind it. Of course, it's very exaggerated. And, she thinks it's totally fine to kill to get what you want. But, it would have been very beneficial to the Scoobies to have another werewolf around,
Yeah, that would have been extremely interesting because we obviously get different vampire characters, but having another werewolf, if she was an ally, that would have been interesting to see where that would have taken Oz's arc, not romantically, just maybe his feelings about being a werewolf would have changed or stayed the same. And that would have been cool.
Well, I think with the reason why Veruca is not seen as an ally to them is because she does not fit the mold of what about femininity is defined by the Scooby Gang. And I know, Kelly, you talk in great depth about this in your blog post about how in the Scooby Gang, your femininity is based upon, fitting within a certain structure of social roles, right? Having sex within relationships and being more coyish about your attractions, and like I was saying earlier, you dress in pastels, and you live in suburbia, you come from good homes, and we don't know all of Veruca's background, but we also know, like, in a way, and I know we'll talk about this later, but she dresses like Faith. We all know that Faith was never going to be a part of the Scooby Gang from the get-go. So
that's even a line in the show. It's like dresses like Faith, voice like an albatross. Yep.
Yeah, exactly.
Totally. And then she has that comment where she says,
Or maybe you just don't want to admit what happened to you. Maybe you just want to pretend like you're a regular guy.
Well, I am. I'm only a wolf 3 nights a month.
Or you're the wolf all the time, and this human face is just your disguise. You ever think about that, Oz?
what are your thoughts or comments or feelings on that?
Again, I'm a conflict girl. And I love the dark side and the dark side of human nature. And I think Oz, especially in the beginning, obviously wanted to hide the fact that he was a werewolf. Yeah. But I don't know. That comment that Veruca says just reminds me of the vampire characters for some weird reason. And it reminds me of some conflicts that Buffy has to go through with her darkness of being a slayer. And yeah, again, I was all about that.
Yep.
Yeah, like Veruca embraces who she is. You know, she's like, I am the wolf all the time. Like, this is who I am. This is a part of me. And whereas we know with Oz, he's meant to feel like, well, this is a curse and you need to be caged away three times of the month, right? You can't be, you can't integrate into regular society with everyone else because of this, right? And it's kind of like the same thing of what we kind of do when women are menstruating. It's like, for so many times out of the month, you need to be like kept away from everyone because you're kind of crazy. You kind of go, you kind of wolf out in a way. And Virgo's like, no, this is me all the time. I shouldn't have to be caged away. I shouldn't have to hide who I am, and I'm going to embrace the monster within.
I love that. And, you know, I don't even have anything to add because that was perfect. Especially the menstruation insight. It's very true. Very true. Okay, I'm going to finish off this segment with a question for all of us, but starting with Jess, who are your favorite female werewolves in film or TV?
Well, Ginger Snaps. Ginger. They're actually, like, when I'm trying to think about it, like, there aren't a lot of female werewolves. Like, well, actually, sorry. No, I'm wrong. God, I can't remember her name, but she's in Bitten.
Yep.
The whole series on that. I read the whole novel series, and I just can't remember the name, but I love that series.
Oh, nice.
The only thing is, though, being a female werewolf in the Bitten series is like a miracle, they call it, because women are not typically supposed to be able to handle the werewolf virus or gene.
Interesting. How about you, Gina?
God, this really shows me how much I need to watch more horror and supernatural, apparently, because I really cannot. I can hardly think of any. I guess, and this is kind of cheating because this is the only one I've seen, I feel like, is Nina from Angel.
Oh, that's
and
fair.
I know
yep.
you also talk about her in your blog post. Please, listeners, if you haven't read it, please go to theneverspodcast.com and please read that because it's brilliantly written. But yeah, I really, really liked Nina, and I'm a Buffy Angel girl. But I really liked how Nina and Angel interacted and what her relationship with Angel did for him. I'm also really glad they didn't end up together because, again, I don't think Angel should be with anyone unless it's Buffy. But I really like Nina's character, and I really felt sorry for her. So.
Yeah, that's fair. You know, actually, there's apparently lots of werewolves and fantasy stuff, which I don't really read or watch. But looking up female werewolves, there are actually a good number in horror. There's actually, werewolves are not, for some reason, I just haven't watched as many. Like vampire stuff, I've watched a lot of. Zombies, Frankenstein type creatures, yes, but werewolves for some reason not. So I'm going to say also Ginger Snaps. Because I think that's us, Jess, but I'm Ginger, for sure. It's also just such a fantastic Canadian movie. And I love the segment in Trick or Treat, which is a Halloween anthology movie that I love. It's a really cool werewolf short segment, and it's really great with Anna Paquin.
Ooh, okay.
I highly recommend it. We'll move on to Vamp Willow, the bisexual vampire. So as a side note, I'll probably get mentioned a few times, but episode 19 of I Spin in Your Podcast, we talked all about this subject. So if you want more and you're really curious about this, then please go listen to that. There's also some really wonderful articles out there to touch on. And it's going to sound like a broken record, but I love first impressions. But what were your first impressions of Willow as a vampire?
Oh my God, it was like the hottest thing.
Right? Oh, goodness.
It is so true.
Yep.
Oh.
Taking off my shawl already.
Literally. I think that's everyone's first reactions. So yeah, it was, so Vamp Willow first showed up in The Wish, and okay, so I'm a multi-shipper, and I also love Willow and Xander. Oh my goodness. I was rooting for them from the beginning because the way Willow feels, and they're so cute, and I could talk about that forever, but it was amazing seeing Vamp Willow and Vamp Xander and their fascinating interaction, and it just felt like amazing alternate universe fan fiction in the best way. Something that Buffy does so well is that so many episodes feel like fan fiction and fan service, but it's actually done so smartly and it's written so well that you can't even call it that. And yeah, it was just really cool seeing Willow in such a different light, and obviously Allison Hannigan's such an amazing actress, and to see her just play a different like flavor when it comes to Willow is amazing. Agreed.
And great point about the fan fiction type episodes, but they're done so well that it doesn't feel like it's that. So good. It's so good. I love alternate universe type episodes on anything because and The Wish is one of my absolute favorite episodes of the entire show.
Oh, so good.
Yeah.
How about you, Jess?
Oh, I loved Vamp Willow as well. Like when she first came on the scene, and I always love that because it's like it's always the nice, quiet girls who always have like the super dark side. Yes, when they go bad, they go bad.
Yeah, they don't half-ass it. I felt the same way as you two. I was so pumped because I just love seeing characters in just like in a different way, in a different light, and just seeing what they would be like as a vampire. And I'm going to go now to that in Doppelgangland. So when that spell kind of goes wrong, and then our Vamp Willow comes into the regular Sunnydale universe. So this is when everybody's all together looking at Vamp Willow. So Rupert Giles says, "It's extraordinary." And Willow says,
It's horrible. That's me as a vampire. I'm so evil and skanky. And I think I'm kind of gay.
Willow, just remember, a vampire's personality has nothing to do with the person it was.
Well, actually, it's a good point.
but we know what he was going to say is like, well, actually, there's a lot of the human personality left in there. But of course, you know, they just get all evil. It's like the evil twin, but there's still a lot of their own selves in there, which brings up an interesting point. So I kind of wanted to break this down into two things, which was her first point is that she's evil and skanky, which is there's going to be a lot of similarities between these women. So, you know, thinking about Veruca, evil and also apparently skanky. And, you know, because she has that allure and that kind of exudes that kind of femininity and sexual vibe and energy that a lot of men are really interested in the Sunnydale verse, because we've seen that in those episodes. So here we are as evil vampy Willow, and she just exudes sex. Let's just, you know, we can just talk about that leather outfit for one moment.
Ooh.
You know, she's confident. She's the aggressor. She wears all black. So of course, when you become a vampire, you have to wear leather, and that's kind of for me like the running joke in Sunnydale. Like Angel, when he turns into Angelus, it's just like, that's when the leather pants come out.
Oh, thank God.
Right? And Spike always has his leather jacket and leather pants. That's just always is something. But it's just like this that leather thing that like goes hand in hand. So like in Sunnydale, sluttiness or skankiness is akin to being evil. They kind of just go together. And again, our evil, very openly sexual women need to be stopped. So thoughts on that, evil and skanky? Not that I'm calling you evil and skanky, sorry.
Sure.
Maybe Jess. Jeez.
And everyone burst out laughing hearing that. They're like, what?
It's so fascinating to me because I totally understand what you're saying and I actually completely agree with it. And then the other side to it is I always think of when it comes to the treatment of female characters, are the men treated in a similar way? And if they are, I'm personally perfectly okay with it. So if it was only like the female vampires that became really sexy and dressed in leather and then the guys were just kind of the same, I could totally understand. But as you said, like Angelus and Spike, they're obviously also incredibly sexy and also wear leather and are also evil. So it's really interesting because I agree with you, but I also see the other side to it.
Yeah, that's a great point. That's a great point that it's very even if you look at it from that point of view and look at just vampires in general. And then you can also see that a lot of vampire sexuality is very fluid.
Yeah.
They don't really care who you are. You're pumped full of blood. There's the sensuality of it, the romanticism of it. So they're just into everyone. Jess.
About being evil and skanky.
Evil and skanky. My new nickname.
I think when it comes to like when we look at vampires and vampirism, like what they represent to us is like the dark fetish and dark fantasies of sexuality, right? And so, and in our like society, and I could definitely see in Sunnydale, like people aren't comfortable with sexuality, just not. And then to have it kind of like be kind of brought like put forth in your face by like these vampires who dress very sexy, like, you know, Willow, like you said, in the leather and then like the corset, she's like exposing, and she's also very sexual in her mannerism and the way she talks and touches things. And even like when you'll think later too, like with like Drusilla and even like Spike. And that just makes people feel uncomfortable. And so when people feel uncomfortable with something, it's better to like try and you take a binary aspect to it and say, well, I'm uncomfortable, so that means this is bad. So that's bad, so then you're evil. So then you're evil, you dress like an evil person, you act like an evil person because I'm uncomfortable. And so this is where we end up labeling people as like good or evil, and that's why like we end up seeing with Willow, like she has to choose whether she's good or evil in her and we'll talk about like her sexuality and her choices because like she can't be bisexual or she's evil. Because vampires are bisexual
and evil.
And evil, exactly.
But then it's interesting too because when in season 6 when she's Dark Willow, I mean, okay, Alison Hannigan and Willow is always sexy to me, but you know what I mean? Totally. Like she doesn't, that's not a part of her character or the way she dresses. So with Willow specifically, in my opinion, it's less about showing when Willow isn't straight and she's skanky that she's evil per se. It's more of just like specifically vampires are, and less about Willow. When she's evil, she's skanky, if that makes sense. Because she isn't in season 6.
We don't see other female vampires outside of Drusilla and Darla, right? Like we get like the odd crony type vampire that's like a one-hit monster, but like our main forerunners are like Drusilla and Darla, and they're always portrayed as like they're evil, like just straight up.
That's very true.
And I'm sure we'll hopefully talk about Drusilla in the future, and I better be there for that episode because she's my favorite character. But it's fascinating her past, you know. Before she was evil, she was very pure, and then the second she's evil, she's not. So yeah, it's really interesting. But then Darla is the opposite. And again, I'm sure we'll talk about this for a while at some point, but I don't know.
I will say to that point, Gina, and you make really, really great points. I will say, though, in season 6 with Dark Willow, though she is not as necessarily overtly sexual, definitely not in her dress. She's very dressed up, dressed like literally, it's almost like a turtleneck that she's wearing. So there's that. But I think, well, for sure, she flirts with Dawn, which in itself is a huge taboo with our age difference. And during that season, Willow and Tara become kind of like pseudo parents to her. So there's a lot of kind of incestuous elements to that I don't think a lot of people talk about or necessarily realize, but she does have some inappropriate behavior and during her time as Dark Willow.
Well, they do talk like about Dark Willow and the way she dresses, because like it goes from this extreme of that very flowery Celtic garb, like the way the dresses and stuff like that, and then she goes to like black femme fatale, where it's like it's very masculine in the way it's style and its color. And when she's, and like you're saying, when she's on her rampage, like her relationship with Rack is very sexualized, and like you said, she's coming on to Dawn.
I'm weird, and I'm in the camp of like, I personally love when villains flirt with like main characters. I don't know why. I love it. It's definitely tropey. So, but you make a really fascinating point when she does talk to Dawn. I never looked at it like that. I just saw it as like Willow's a lot more confident. She does want to make things uncomfortable because she's in a really dark place.
Yeah. No, for sure. And I mean, it very well could just be that, but it still happens, you know?
Yeah, for sure.
Yikes. I guess according to Buffy the Vampire Slayer, the show, if you were black, you're evil. Uh-oh. Uh-oh.
You'd be never part of the Scooby Gang, Kelly. Never.
I definitely could not be, because I'd be Faith and everyone would hate me. Okay. So we'll go on to the second portion of what she said, which was, and I think I'm kind of gay. So this is at the point where we kind of, I guess, foreshadow what might happen later on in the series, where she is seen, or she herself identifies as gay. But if you also look at different aspects of, you know, her personality and comments that she makes throughout the series, and her as Vamp Willow and as Dark Willow, she kind of swings both ways. And so there was this, I read in this really wonderful article about like deviant sexuality and deviant gender expression. And that was kind of a term called monster queer, sorry. and this gentleman talks about in his book, Monsters in the Closet, Homosexuality in the Horror Film, which is on my Amazon wish list and has been forever. But yeah, so it kind of talks about our monster queers, which Vamp Willow definitely could be because her sexuality is very fluid. So she's seen as like sexy, alluring. They're politically progressive figure to some, but to others, they might, who are more enmeshed in like a traditional role of what monsters and normality is, they're still seen as a social threat and they have to be eradicated. And, you know, monsters are often seen as other, queer folks are often seen as other, but they have to be destroyed, right? And then in reality, people feel that way about certain queer folks, and that is not an acceptable way to live. So our monsters we can have very different interpretations. We can see them as very threatening. We can see them as very empowering, but they're terrifying and fascinating at the same time.
Oh, I hate playing devil's advocate.
No, you love it. You love confrontation. You love conflict.
There you go. You're so right. You're so right. Who am I kidding? It's great to see both sides of things, and I completely agree with that. And it's fascinating. But I also see Tara as such a wonderful person, and she's so sweet, and she doesn't take crap, but she's also so loving, and she's not a villain.
No, she is not. No, for sure.
You know, so it's like, but then it's fascinating too, because the other queer character in the show is Andrew, which I love with all my heart.
Yes. Yeah.
It's a little bit too much. I love him. But he obviously also started as a villain.
Right. It was more just related to like really specifically looking at like the Vamp Willow, Dark Willow aspect, generally, mainly just Vamp Willow. And again, all the other like vampires and stuff like that, which we kind of talked about already, just with regards to they're evil, they're other, they also are kind of queer. Go ahead, Jess.
Well, I was just trying, like I was thinking, so like historically, bisexual women have always been characterized as immoral and hypersexualized, and that they're typically often seen as sex objects of transgressive figures in a male-dominated world. So when you take bisexuality, and this is what I'm referring to in terms of like Vamp Willow, because I think, you know, Vamp Willow is bisexual, and connecting it to vampirism is where it's making it monstrous, because we know that people who are evil are usually seen as confused or delusional. And we know that there's mention in the series, I think at one point, like Spike and Angel or something, the comments are made. They're like, yeah, we kind of go both ways. So like Drusilla, Darla, Spike, Evil Angel, like they're all bisexual. They're very fluid in their sexuality. And that is scary to people. Because we don't know where in a mono society, especially in the in the 1990s, late 1990s and the early 2000s, like it's all about you're either gay or you're straight. You can't be one or the other. Or if you're bisexual, half the time, and I'm only speaking this from experience, you're seen as a flip-flopper. That, oh, you just haven't met the right woman yet, or you haven't met the right guy yet. So you're eventually going to make a decision. And you can't really live in this binary world. And typically no, you have to live in a binary world. Pardon me. You just can't be in this gray haze and kind of be in the middle, because that confuses people.
Yeah. And for sure. And yeah, sorry, I was saying, and again, we talk about this in episode 19 of our podcast. So if you're interested to go over there for more in depth, but as we know, Willow turns gay, so to speak, and all is good in the world. She's picked a side, and that at the time, again, this is like early 2000s, that side is very palatable to viewers. And of course, Willow and Tara's relationship is the healthiest on the show. It's beautiful, it's wonderful, and it's fantastic. And that really should be celebrated. But yeah, so it's kind of just looking at, again, bisexuality, or yes, that binary kind of sexuality in Sunnydale. We're kind of just looking at the microcosm of Sunnydale in Buffy the Vampire Slayer. It's not understood. It's not something, because as it's shown, it's all the bisexuals that are sexually fluid are vampires and are demons and are, you know, other types of figures, or polyamorous or aggressively sexual. They're excessive. They're evil. Vamp Willow is a total fantasy. Not been like, ooh, she's a fantasy, but she's a fantasy, right? She's a truly excessive and exaggerated character for a reason, I think.
Yeah, she's the woman you fantasize about, but not the woman you bring home to mom.
Yeah. Exactly.
Or both.
Yeah.
I'm just kidding.
I love it. Yeah, there is this one point, Jesse brought up Spike and Angel, but there's one point where they're like, oh, well, there was that one time in Amsterdam or something like that. I'm like, oh, they totally banged.
Oh, totally.
Oh, 100%. And I have a theory that it was way more than once. They just don't want to bring it up to each other. Cause I am so sorry. They spent way too long with each other and they did not just sleep together once.
Yeah, no, for sure. That's probably why there's so many hurt feelings between Spike and especially on Spike's part and Angel. Because they're just maybe there was something. Yeah, there was something more than just one time.
Well, if I was hanging out with Angel, Spike, Drusilla, and Darla for hundreds of years,
yeah,
I would have definitely been with all of them, and they probably were all together at some point.
100%. And if Spike and Angel are talking about when they have been together, they're obviously not counting the times when it was them four all together. So
oh my God,
I have many thoughts. The Fang Four are my favorites. So.
Oh my God, I totally derailed this.
No, but okay, one last thing I want to talk about this, because again, amazing points. I could argue as well that when I first watched Buffy, I wasn't really sure of my sexuality, and I loved when Willow said and I think I'm kind of gay, and it also brings up obviously how the other vampires are sexually. And if you think about it, I think Buffy and Angel does such an amazing job with the vampire characters being obviously they're evil, but they're so likable in a way that like, if you ask anyone, those vampires are like a lot of people's favorite characters. So if the vampires were just evil and not complex and they were, you know, bisexual characters, then that's kind of messed up. But in my opinion, they're such amazing characters that even though they're evil, so many people love them. So I personally love that they're bisexual or pansexual. And I think in a way, just because they're evil, that doesn't mean it's not good representation because so many people love them.
Yeah.
I'm not saying, you know, it still sucks that the only bisexual or pansexual characters are evil. That part sucks, but they're at least amazingly complex evil characters.
Great point.
That's a really good point.
Great point, because they are a lot of people's favorite characters. Definitely. So there's, you know, pros and cons to a lot of this. And I think that just shows that it's an incredibly well-written show.
Yes. The best art, I feel like, is art that you can debate and discuss and have 2 points of views or kind of agree with everything. That's kind of how I'm realizing that I also agree with everything you guys are saying.
Right. Not that that was like the point of all of this, but I love this conversation because, again, you're bringing up things that I hadn't really thought about. And I just love that. Like, there's so many pros and cons to all of this. And I think a lot of good representation and sometimes not very good representation, like just straight up gay characters. I think that was really strong. The bi characters, a little problematic. But I mean, again, it was like late 90s, early 2000s. I think some of that's a product of its time. And if it was made now, I think it would have been much different. Okay, let's move on to our third and final monstrous woman of Buffy the Vampire Slayer and my now all-time favorite character, Faith, the human monster.
Stop struggling. This won't hurt.
It's okay, I got it. You're Buffy, right? Oh, I'm Faith.
I'm gonna go on a limb and say there's a new Slayer in town.
Well, we know that when she blew onto the scene, I died. I just was so excited. Thanks, B. And she just like slays that vampire and like goes back into the bronze. I love her energy. I love her attitude. I love how she dressed. And it was just something that we really, I think by season 3, we're like, yep, we needed this. We needed this kind of character to kind of spruce things up a bit, especially with just how, I don't want to necessarily say demure, but kind of demure. Like Anya wasn't really a part of everything yet. She was kind of background, you know, once the wish came along, she was kind of around a little bit, but, you know, Faith was there. She blew onto the scene and just knocked our socks off, I think. What were your first impressions?
Weirdly enough, season 3 was the season it took for me the longest to finish for whatever reason. Not that it's not amazing. I just missed Spike so much. But with that being said, again, conflict girl. I loved Faith. She did remind me a lot of Spike, but I was like, you know what? Since Spike isn't here, and I hate saying that because that's what I thought at the time. Since Spike isn't here, I love that Faith is. But obviously, the more I rewatch it, obviously now, they're so completely different. And yeah, I just always really liked Faith. I love the conflict she brung. I love that. So we saw Kendra before. And obviously Buffy and Kendra are completely different, but I love seeing Faith being a Slayer that is also completely different than both Buffy and Kendra. So seeing just a different flavor of what a Slayer could be. And again, I love the dark side of things. So Faith is everything that Buffy sometimes wishes she could be. Faith is everything Buffy tries to hide about herself, and Faith is also everything Buffy isn't, and that's really complex. So I really love that about Faith.
How about you, Jess?
Oh, when I first saw Faith come onto the scene, I was like you, Kelly, and I was all for it. I love strong, dark-haired women in my TV series. I love how because like being a huge fan of Xena Warrior Princess, that just like that darkness, that brooding aspect, but like you're at the same time too, they're like they're battling with this inner toil within themselves to do what's right, but also they know that sometimes they have to make the hard decisions that no one else can, and that makes them a bad person. And so when Faith came onto the scene, I'm like, okay, so she's like the Xena of, she's like seasons 1 and 2 of Xena in Buffy.
Oh,
before
nice.
Xena starts to become like really good because of her sidekick and everything. So that's, you know, and I do, like, I love Faith's story, and I think watching again the last 2 years and reading Kelly's blog posts and doing the research that Kelly and I have done about Faith has made me really enjoy her as a character as well, and her complexity, and really sad for how she gets treated and how she gets pushed off a lot of the times in the show.
Yeah, exactly. So the first thing I want to talk about is, do you think overall that Faith was accepted by the Scoobies, and why or why not? In my blog post, I say no, but we're here to talk with you two. So do you think so?
That's a great question. I feel like initially no, and then I feel like eventually by the end of season 7, 100%. But then the comics happen, and in season 8, I love Faith so much. I love her arc. She's so great. In season 8, then she kind of has the Buffy complex again, where she's kind of comparing herself, and she's not with the Scoobies. So I feel like yes and no, to be honest. But I do love that Faith comes back in season 7, and I do love that she's been through so much, even though she's already been through so much when we meet her in season 3. She's obviously even been through a lot more, and I feel like they do accept her more, maybe not completely, but more in season 7.
Right. You know, a short thing about season 7. Of course, this is all how you run a show, but I'm watching and I'm like, why didn't they get her sooner? It's very frustrating to me. And I'm like, what? But of course, you know, dramatic effect and everything by like episode 7. They're like, oh, maybe we should get Faith involved in the end of the world. I don't know though, but maybe now we should. Well, maybe that's something to be said, that they waited so long because there's like, ugh, it's Faith. There's like not really a very warm welcoming when she does get back into Sunnydale. So maybe they waited so long because
they're maybe like concerned that she's kind of like still like a loose cannon. Because like kind of like the idea that, you know, while the Scooby Gang never really accepted Faith, at the same time too, she rejected them. Like she rejected their traditional white middle class ways and their behaviors. And so she, in a way, like while she was an outsider and that was hard for her, at the same time too, it's what helped her get through and survive life and get the job done. Yeah. And it also feeling like she could be true to herself instead of having to like be what they wanted her to be and not be true to herself.
It's fantastic. So yeah, for me, I just thought that Faith it's just too much for that tidy town of Sunnydale and too much for those Scoobies to handle. I think that if they would have celebrated her strengths, which she had many, and encouraged her and didn't demean her or leave her out and just accepted her for who she was, which I know was very different from everyone else there. Of course she went to the mayor. He, you know, though he's an evil mayor, but he's like, you're special. You have gifts. Let's exploit them for his, you know, gain. But he's like, yeah, look at all these wonderful things you can do. You are awesome. But nobody said that to her. Nobody really, you know, I guess just accepted her and appreciated her for who she was.
I personally love that the mayor was the only person to do that, because one of my favorite things about Buffy, and I think that Joss Whedon has a lot in his work, is that like, you know, evil and good isn't just black and white. And of course, like the evil big bad of season 3, the mayor, is the one that actually accepts her. I kind of love that. I think in a weird way, it's showcasing a weakness that our heroes have. And I love Faith and the mayor's relationship. It's so complex and fascinating and like kind of sweet, which again, since they're like the villains of season 3, it's great to showcase that, because I don't know, I hate so many like movies or TV shows that like the villains are just bad and that's it.
I know.
Like I love the complexity, you know?
I was gonna say, like, in my mind, I was saying like evil accepts evil, but I really don't think Faith is necessarily evil. But you made a good point that like evil did accept her for who she was, you know? And I know there's a much more intelligent thought in my brain about that right now, but I'm losing it. But I just, yeah, you're right. It's really interesting that this evil person was able to see the amazing person and like slayer and fighter that she was, but our Scoobies could not.
Right.
Well, it's like so interesting because at the same time you see this amazing quality about Faith is that she is loyal and she, like, and if you empathize with her and you understand where she's coming from and give her that space to be who she is, then she gives you her allegiance and she's there for you. And so that's where that relationship with the mayor is so interesting because of that. She just has that loyalty. And I think she would have had that same loyalty for the rest of Buffy and the Scoobies if they didn't reject her from the outset and call her and labeled her the bad girl right from the beginning and said, you're a high school dropout. You're uninhibited. You're impulsive. You're like sexually experienced. You're of a lower class background. Look at the clothing you reveal. You're a bad girl.
Yeah, for sure. And thinking about bad girls versus good girls, of course, so often and in the show, and then I think fans like to compare and contrast Faith and Buffy. So where do you two think are like some of the biggest kind of aspects where they're similar or where they differ?
I just feel like Faith is a lot more confident, which I actually really appreciated when I was first watching the show. Like, some women are just more confident than other women, and it's based on like how they grew up and their experiences. And I think because of Faith's, obviously her crazy upbringing and her childhood and what she's had to go through, that made her more confident. So for me, it was never like, oh, she's confident and sexy because she's more, I don't want to say more evil than Buffy, but kind of, but I just like that she was confident because that's how she is. And I'm sure Buffy was obviously jealous of that. And I don't know, maybe I just love villains so much and I always see it from their perspective that I never looked at Faith as a bad person. I just looked at her as like a foil for Buffy, and that doesn't mean she's bad. But I'm sure there was a lot of viewers that didn't look at it that way, and I'm sure they made it seem like she's a bad person. But I don't know. Yep. I never looked at Faith as bad. And you could probably write like a million essays about Faith and Buffy and how they're different, how they're like. It's honestly like one of the most complex and fascinating and best relationships in the Buffyverse. Yeah, it's great. And again, I really do think obviously Faith was jealous of Buffy, but I definitely think obviously Buffy was also jealous of Faith. And I don't think Faith realized that. I feel like if she did realize it, she'd be a little happier.
Interesting. That's definitely a good point. That's definitely a good point. If people just would have been maybe more honest with themselves and each other, that all of this could have gone a much different route.
Well, I like how, because I remember when Kelly and I, when we talked about this in our first Buffy episode, and I read the article, I hope evil takes MasterCard, and it's MasterCard and Faith the Vampire Slayer and the image of the bad girl in society. And this essay talks about the differences between Faith and Buffy, where in the sense like Faith, it represents the dark side of slaying, but she represents this most postmodern feminism where she's very sexualized femininity. She's more radical. She's aggressive, kind of man-hating, where Buffy is more of the third wave feminism, which is all about girl power and being assertive while still being feminine and keeping that at the same time too. And I think we sometimes find we run into conflict with those types of feminism and how we address each other.
Yes. Like one is better than the other, but there's a lot of strengths and, of course, really wonderful points to both viewpoints, I guess you could say.
Exactly. Yeah.
I find with Faith that like she just really thrives in a very loose environment, and she needs limited rules and guidance. She just needs the opportunity to kind of just like do her work. And I can totally understand that. And Buffy's the opposite. You know, she needs all the training and the practice and the schooling and the guidance. She doesn't just wing it, let's say. You know, and Faith's all about winging it. And if everybody tried to fit Faith into this perfect Slayer box and this mold, You know, we saw it with Kendra. Kendra was even more into that mold. She didn't even have family and friends. She wasn't allowed. It was all about being a slayer and studying, and you're going to fight evil, and that's all you have in this world. You know, Buffy, you know, and that's why she's so different, and she clashes with the council all the time, because we have, you know, she has all this support, emotional support, familiar support, friendship, and partners, romantic relationships and stuff. And she sees it as an asset, which is what she, you know, talks about with Kendra. And then Faith comes along, like Gina was talking about. We have 3 very different Slayers, which, side note, I love the aspect of the Slayer. And if they did more stuff on Slayers and just like different aspects of the world at different time periods, I'd be hella for it. You know, so you have Faith come in, and how she wants to work is just like very loose. Okay, you want me to go kill a demon? I don't care what, like, just how do I kill it? Great, I'm going to go do it. And she'll get it done. She gets the work done. She's very efficient, you know, and she just doesn't fit into that mold. And we have, again, we're going to say this again for Faith, but she doesn't fit in any of these molds. She doesn't fit into the Slayer mold. She doesn't fit into like the general life mold. She doesn't fit in the general like rule of woman mold for Sunnydale. So of course she is kind of just not accepted. She's kind of discarded. She's not, you know, and then she kind of just goes onto the dark side, so to speak. Then
Beautifully said.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Then it gets into, I think, a reoccurring theme to these monstrous women, and we'll talk about in part 2, but it's a lot of this comes down to sexuality. Faith is shown, her sexuality is shown as dangerous. It's empty. It's non-monogamous. You know, case in point, Xander. You know, she dances with all people at the Bronze. She's flirting with men, women, and she is obviously seen as a very extreme threat to the women of the Scoobies. And at that point, it really was just Willow and Cordelia. But she is just so, again, excessive, and it's just too much. And she just shows this like absolute pleasure in being all that she is. You know, unabashedly who she is. She's a Slayer, and she loves that. She loves violence. She loves sex. She's strong. She's powerful. And that is just such a big no-no.
Faith is more of like an antagonist, not really a villain, in my opinion. So I always look at either the villain or the antagonist's point of view. And I guess I just put myself so much in her head that I don't. Obviously, the show is portraying her as bad, but I also feel like it's complex, and I also feel, I don't know, I've never seen any Faith episodes, and it feels like the writers are judging her.
Mm-hmm. I agree. I definitely agree. I don't think she is a bad person either. It's just, again, it's coming down to the microcosm of Sunnydale, and they view her this way because of how she acts and her behavior and who she is. I think that's the reason why she is my favorite character, is because she's infinitely nuanced and hugely complex as a person, as a woman, as a Slayer. And I just love all of that. When you watch her arc from Buffy into Angel and then back to Buffy, it's incredible. Jess, you're kind of silent for a little bit. Did we lose you?
No, I'm here. I was just listening. You're making some really great points about Faith and her sexuality. And I just think it's always so interesting how, and it's not just like in the microcosm of Sunnydale, but just in general, when we have women on TV who are, you know, very sexually fluid or aggressive in their sexuality, some people find it can be off-putting because they're just like, oh, well, that's very uncomfortable. And, or, you know, or they call her like the slut or the skank, and her morals are in question. And I feel that's the same path that would happen to Faith in the end. I was really interested too, because I had read another article in preparation for this about, because it's wrong, limitations of female empowerment in Buffy the Vampire Slayer. And they talked about Faith's journey of the series, about trying, and what she goes through is all about forcing her to conform to the appropriate version of female empowerment. One that is moderate, morally righteous, and carefully controlled. So like we were talking earlier about like Buffy, right? Following a routine, and everything is very carefully monitored, where it's not the same for Faith. And I thought it was so interesting about how they talk about in this essay the relationship. So we know that Faith, she's, you know, sexually aggressive. She is all about like, you know, like when she's done slaying, she gets her kicks off, and that feels really great. She's not about having a monogamous relationships and just, you know, going to the beat of her own drum. However, in season 7, we see that a relationship begins to develop with Principal Woods. And in a way, he challenges her in her sexuality, but at the same time too, he's trying to entice her into a monogamous relationship to make her conform to this appropriate version of female empowerment. Like, okay, well, you can be a powerful woman. However, we must contain this sexuality of yours because it's a little too much for the men of this town. It's too much.
Totally. I have read about that as well, and it's interesting because maybe by the end of season 7, she's maybe accepted and she's also reformed, and part of her reformation is that now she's going to get into a romantic, stable, normal monogamous relationship, and that is now. She has now kind of come full circle, and now she is like, she's fine. She is now okay to be here because, there's this dude that challenges her, but, he's going to tame her because, Faith needs to be tamed. And that's an aspect that everybody was trying to do, was to, she was a wild card. We have to tame this unruly, unlivable, dangerous woman.
So even without reading the comics, I never thought about Faith and Principal Wood like actually getting together. I always just saw it as like Principal Wood just kind of giving her a chance that other people haven't, and what that would do to Faith's character. Because again, I don't really see Faith like obviously being with someone long term. I just loved that he would give her a different kind of chance. And that's what I loved about their relationship and their little interaction towards the end of the show was like, aw, like their personalities are really cute together. He does challenge her. She challenges him as well. And it's less about her being tamed and more about him just like treating her seriously enough to maybe be in a relationship.
Yeah, you definitely could see it that way. And I think initially Faria did. I'm not really like set in stone in how I feel about their relationship. But then thinking about it now, I mean, his mother was a slayer. He had a very unfortunate upbringing because his mother was a slayer. Everybody was in danger all the time. She was killed by Spike. So maybe there's an element of, yes, he does want to tame her because he knows how crazy and unruly and dangerous a life for a slayer is. So maybe this is his time, his chance to, quote unquote, help this woman out and show her that it's time to settle down.
Ooh, that is really interesting.
Okay, I'm going to move on unless there's any final thoughts.
No, I'm good. Thank you.
Excellent. Okay. So a question for you folks, or it might have been in the general notes, but, as now we're winding down this discussion, it seems that, and to me anyways, it seems that the Whedonverse and at least Buffy the show is actually quite conservative. And do you agree, disagree? Why not? Any thoughts on that?
I think the way the writers write the complex characters, even if they're quote unquote bad, I personally can't say the show is conservative because if it was conservative, I don't even think they would ever show the other sides of human nature. And I think they would write it less complex, in my opinion. Sure, I think the main 3 characters, you can think of them as conservative in the sense of when it comes to like sex and stuff. But I think overall, it isn't conservative because, at least for me, when I was first watching it, again, I was very unsure of like my sexuality. Like this show opened my eyes to so many things and made me feel differently about things. So for me, it made me less conservative.
Nice.
Yeah. So
that's great.
Because again, even just seeing the show Angel, with, Angel and Spike, saying their thing, that they've had a thing. I'm like, oh my God, like seeing 2 male characters, like say that out loud. Like think of all the straight men that are watching this. I was just very, very happy about it. It just really opened my eyes. So it's hard for me to think of the Whedonverse in that way.
So I think for the time period that Buffy came out, I think it was somewhat liberal in the sense that it was able to touch upon ideas and have discussions about things that were happening of the time, like the late 90s and early 2000s. So like we talked about in our episode 19 about, it was so important that homosexuality was represented in Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and it was great for its time. And maybe the writer's room was not thinking at the time about, okay, well, how important it is to talk about bisexuality and, move away from this idea by erasure. So I think it was liberal in the time that it came out and it was written, but it can be viewed as a bit conservative in our time now. And so when we look back and we're like, okay, well, where are people of color? Where is our diversity? We know, how are we addressing this idea of bi erasure? So, so I think it's like, it straddles the line of being, liberal, but also being conservative at the same time. But for when it came out though, and how it was such an impact for, young men and women of our age, growing up and watching this, they're like, oh my God, what is this? I love this. There's so much I need to think about now. It was perfect at the time period.
Excellent. Yeah, I definitely agree. I think when it comes to critically evaluating shows and movies from our past, it's important to look at things contextually and like time frame wise and everything. All right. My last big question that I love and I'm excited about. Okay. How do you two feel about evil women or monstrous women? Do you find you can relate to them? Do you find them empowering? Or do you more relate to figures like Willow, Buffy, or Cordelia?
Great question. I think I've probably mentioned a few times how much I love villains.
Yes.
Even so much that I wrote a Sherlock novella with Moriarty's perspective. However, it makes me sad when I hear people say things like, oh, usually the main characters of things aren't the best. Like, I don't think Buffy's the best character. I don't think Harry Potter's the best character. Even if they're not, which I don't agree with, I still think the heroes in Buffy are also they also show their dark sides as well. And I think the villains also show their good sides. So I can't even choose. My favorite character is Drusilla. So I guess if you look at it, I would like the monstrous women more, but I also love Buffy so much. And I think they all show different sides. So, I can't choose.
You have to choose right now. I'm just kidding.
No.
Thank you. That's amazing. How about you, Jess?
Well, I love, Gina, that you bring up a really good point that the diversity of the show was able to show is both our heroes and our villains can be good and they can be bad. And this is a real struggle in our world. Like, you're not always love and light. Sometimes some darkness is in there and you got to deal with that. But I also know for myself, like growing up, I was always all about the villains in like the evil queens in Disney movies. Like, come on, Maleficent, like Ursula, like they were awesome. Like, so I do tend to, and like I said, one of my favorite female role models was Xena, Warrior Princess. She was a bad person for a good period of time, and her storyline was all about her redemption and how she had to struggle with that good and bad side. So I like the characters to have diversity to them. I don't like them to be 100% purely good.
Yeah, you like that balancing act that can happen between the good quote and bad quote side.
Yeah,
it's fantastic. I totally get that. For me, I personally really, really love evil, bad women. I think they represent how women aren't supposed to act and how women are supposed to be in many ways. These women are, again, this is in certain ways, they're shown, I feel like, stronger, they're more confident, they're sexual, they're smart. And I find empowerment more so in these dark, dangerous, evil, monstrous women than I do from the quote unquote good and virtuous women. These evil women tend to live outside our social norms and think outside of the box. And that is something that I have related to since I was a teenager. So when I decided that I'm going to wear all black for now the rest of my life, there is that sense of freedom in those characters that I really enjoy because they fully embrace their darkness. And I tend to enjoy those characters and find them much more empowering. I love Buffy so much. She is, a part of the reason why I am here today. I do like the diversity in the characters, but when it comes down to it, I find the strength in our feminine monsters because I find that in myself more. The dark-haired, the raven-haired mavens.
There you go. Lovely, lovely.
Okay, so for part 2 of the Monstrous Women of Buffy, we're going to talk about Drusilla, Darla, Anya, and Glory.
Yes.
And like I said, Jess, I would really love to have you back for that.
I'd love to talk about Anya.
Excellent. So it's now time for us to check in with all of you as we open up the Nevers mailbox. If you have a question, comment, topic suggestions, or if you want to correct something that we said in a previous episode, write it all down and send it to us at theneverspodcast@gmail.com or tweet it to us at theneverspodcast without an A. And we'll be sure to read it on an upcoming episode. So we have 2 letters today. The first one is a long one, and I'm going to break it up into sections. So the first letter is from longtime listener Berger. He says, "Hi, Whedonites. So happy to see that you're doing an episode on these women. I read Kelly Gardner's essay on Faith, and I found it very interesting. Though, speaking as a straight-ish white man person, I found myself disagreeing with many of the points made. I agree that Faith has many likable and admirable qualities. Also, she does differ from the Sunnydale women in some important ways. However, I struggle to see how Faith, as she appears on paper or on screen, could be seen as a badass feminist. Faith can be quite cruel, and often this cruelness is directed towards other women. A prime example is the way she bullies Tara in Who Are You? This act is completely unmotivated, and Faith seems to enjoy herself very much. Other examples are when she leaves a visitor to the hospital unconscious, badly beaten, and stripped, or when she elbows a woman in the mouth because she pecks Faith on the shoulder after Faith has interjected herself between the woman and her boyfriend." So I'm going to stop it first at that, and I'm going to first respond because it's directly related to my post. So just as clarification, my post discusses Faith up until the point before she goes to the quote-unquote dark side. My argument was that she would have been accepted for who she was if she would have been accepted, she wouldn't have gone down that path. I think she definitely is very cruel and mean to people later on, but I think some of this can extend to some elements of insecurity that perhaps Faith feels and some jealousy of personal relationships. Also, Faith is somebody who likes to rock a boat and she is a bit of a bitch in the later episodes. My post was up until a certain point. A comment is that, yeah, she's not very nice later on, but she's also kind of gone to that quote unquote dark side. And she wasn't mean before that. So her badass kind of feminist aspect of it, I think it's her overall attitude in her certain behaviors at certain points in her very traumatic, dark, struggling life were not great. But do I see that as we can't see her as a feminist type icon or character? No, I disagree with that.
Every single character messes up. So that would be like saying, in a way, like, oh, Buffy's not a feminist character because she did this and this and this,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Or Willow.
Yes.
Yeah. I would agree with you too, right? Because it's like saying, we can't say that Buffy and Willow are feminist characters when they're calling other women skanks and sluts and stuff like that. That's not very feminist.
Oh God, exactly. Great point. That wouldn't be very nice and feminist of you to look down upon other women for being more sexually open than you. Yes, that's exactly. So saying she's kind of badass and a feminist icon is because she's unabashedly comfortable in who she is. And that is amazing. And you don't always see that in shows and in movies. Okay, the next section says, and while the Scoobies are somewhat taken aback by Faith's sexual confidence, such as when Cordelia tells Xander to stop asking for more sexy stories.
The whole summer it was like the worst heat wave. So it's about 118 degrees and I'm sleeping without a stitch on. And all of a sudden I hear the screaming from outside. So I go tearing out, stark nude, and this church bus is broke down and there's these 3 vamps feasting on half the Baptist in South Boston. So I waste the vamps and the preacher comes up and he's hugging me like there's no tomorrow. When all of a sudden the cops pull up and they arrested us both.
Wow, they should film that story and show it every Christmas.
God, I could eat a horse. Isn't it crazy how slaying just always makes you hungry and horny?
Well, sometimes I crave a non-fat yogurt afterwards.
What was the story about that alligator you
said something before.
Oh, there's this big daddy vampire out of Missouri. He used to keep them as pets. So he's got me wrestling one of them, okay? The thing must have been 12 feet long, and I'm,
was this, also naked?
Well, the alligator was.
Xander, find a new theme.
Faith shows very little respect for Buffy's boundaries while asking her about her sex life. So for me, I don't necessarily recall exact example of this, but I know that Buffy is uncomfortable with her sexuality. So if Faith is talking about her sexuality very openly, then that makes Buffy uncomfortable. You know, how, I think there's a moment where Faith does like this like grunting kind of like fist pump in the air type movement and motion. And Buffy's like, oh my God. Like she's just like very put off by that, but I still think that's okay. Some people need to be a little bit nudged. I don't think she necessarily went beyond any kind of boundaries.
Well, I think that's just going back to where people are just uncomfortable talking about sex in general, right? So, talking, when people say like, oh, I did this thing with so-and-so, like, I don't want to hear your sex life or TMI. Like, I don't want to get into that, right? And then once again, we're making sex taboo and we're putting in this dark room saying you only ever do and talk about this in this dark place and you never come out and talk about it in public because why normalize sex, right? That's not right.
Exactly. So another section, he says, personally, I don't take much issue with how other characters react to Faith. I think the problem is how Faith is written. The portrayal of Faith makes it seem as though there is a connection between sexual confidence and cruelty in women. Buffy's experiences further reinforces that idea in indulging in sex that leads to bad things, such as in Surprise Innocence and all of season 6. I think that's an amazing point.
Yeah, that is a really good point.
Oh, that's tough for me. Because Surprise and Innocence are two of my favorite episodes for very obvious reasons. Angelus is the best thing ever, and he's a monster. But and I'm sure you guys know this, like, I love the whole metaphor of like a guy can change the second you have sex with him because that's all he wanted in the first place. And I think obviously like Surprise and Innocence is just a metaphor for that. It's not necessarily a metaphor for like everything sex in the show. And I also think season 6 with Spike and Buffy, if sex was portrayed in any other way with them, it would be very uncharacteristic and very out of character. And I also think Buffy's in such a bad place that that's why she's engaging in sex like that. If sex was always bad in this show, maybe I could agree with that statement, but I don't think it is.
How about you, Jess?
I agree. I would not I don't have much more to say to that comment.
Right. Yeah, it was a really wonderful point, and I think it just briefly it comes down to that slut name game, right? It's there's insecurities and uncomfortable aspects, and we've kind of touched upon all of this throughout this entire episode, but overtly sexual women threaten other women that perhaps are not overtly sexual. And I think it was more like thinking about the 90s and thousands. As an adult in many, many years, for many years, I have yet to hear anybody call somebody a slut. I really don't think that is overall so much the thing that women call other women now. I think it might be something that men still call women and people in power call other women, but I don't think that really is stuff that we talk about nowadays. So for its time, I think that is a really wonderful insight that sexual confidence means that you are you're a threat and you are to be looked down upon. So you're just going to have to, it's just essentially that it's a competition. And that might come down to monogamy. That if another woman is very sexual, it means that they're going to come after your man and want to have sex with them. But also, hey, remember when we talked about Oz and having agency? Well, when you talked about, your man not having sex with other women. So infinitely complicated. Okay, so the next one, Jess will like. I think that a character that often gets overlooked in these discussions is Anya. Of course, there are certain issues with Anya lame-ass made-up maiden name too. Firstly, she relies upon men to give her an identity, be it D'Hoffryn, Xander, or Giles. When she is on her own, she wonders if she is, quote, really nobody. Secondly, she shows little interest in joining the Scooby sisterhood. But Anya loves sex and is very vocal about it. Her oversharing may cause some eyeball rolling from the more prudish members of the group, but after 1,000 years of chastity, Anya seems to be genuinely enjoying herself. Unlike Faith, Anya may be mostly monogamous, but in Entropy, she angrily defends her right to have casual comfort sex with Spike. I definitely have thoughts on this. I'm going to start with you, Jess.
In the sense of like the character of Anya being overlooked?
That and her relying upon men to give her an identity.
I don't think, okay. Yes, I do struggle with that because there's an element where she's all about being a vengeance demon. And the reason why she's a vengeance demon is because she was cheated on by her former partner, Olaf.
Yes.
But like at the same time too, she was kind of a bit witchy in her practices. And she was kind of like the, I guess like kind of like the witch of the neighborhood in a way. And, but at the same time too, though, she tried, like, I don't want to say that she does, like, he makes a good point though, that I didn't think of. I'm like, okay, yeah, so maybe her relationships, she really was kind of defining herself in the relationships, but at the same time too, she's also a very strong character. And she comes across, and I find a lot of times, like, when she is just the individual that she is, who she is, she gets put down a lot, or she gets told to be shut up or be quiet, or Anya, you don't know what you're talking about, right? And I'm like, well, no, like, you keep trying to put her in her place, and it really was a really shitty thing that Xander did by leaving her at the altar. But at the same time too, I felt it was a good thing for her because she was able to find herself again and find out who she is as an individual and as a contributor to the Scooby Gang. And then at the same time too, like, they, you know, even though they kind of accepted her as part of the Scooby Gang, she was kind of like, I don't really want to be accepted as part of the Scooby Gang. I just kind of want to be me and just continue to be me.
Great points. And yes, I do love the points that he had brought up. It's really great. And again, I don't think she's necessarily overlooked, but I think that I personally overlook her a lot. And I'm really looking forward to part 2 of this, and we can like really get deeper into Anya. So my brief thing I'll say about her is that I think Anya stating that she's a nobody could come from her reflections of the female experience after 1,000 years. And she feels like she needs to perform as a normal female human. A woman, and not just like a demon woman, but like an actual human woman now. And so due to her behavior and her very frank honesty, that she isn't truly a part of the Scoobies, because we don't really see her ever hanging out with the women from what I can remember, but only ever in like a group activity. And she's kind of like, you could see her kind of as like a tag along as Xander's girlfriend. But Jess made a good point of like, maybe that's like, she doesn't even want to be a part of it. That's fine. I don't think she ever experiences like, oh, I don't want to be a part of this, or yes, I want to be a part of this. It's just like, she's kind of just Anya, and that's just that. And that's great. Moving on, he says, I really like Vampire Willow. The two Willows may conform to a Madonna horror dichotomy, but human Willow gets to integrate some of her vampire twin's qualities into herself. She sees this sexually ambiguous and assertive reflection of herself and decides that she can learn something from that. I love that. Great points. I hate and love the Madonna horror dichotomy, which we didn't talk about, but I definitely could see that in our regular Willow and our Wish Willow or our Vampire Willow. And again, I'd say listen to episode 19 of I Spin Your Podcast for much more in-depth conversation about that. But I do think it's an interesting point about Willow potentially taking inside of herself some aspects of Vamp Willow later in life. Then the last thing was, I believe Drusilla is the most powerful member of the 3-piece whirlwind in season 2. Agreed. She has Spike and Angel eating out of her hand. Yes, Drusilla, and we'll definitely talk about her next time because she's actually one of my favorite characters and my favorite vampire of the series.
I cannot have loved that comment anymore.
Yeah.
It is perfect. She has Spike and Angel eating out of her hand.
Oh, completely.
Bless you.
Yep. It's very true. They both want her. They both desire her. They both had her, obviously.
Love it.
You know, but I don't even think she knows the power that she has over men and just everyone.
Right. Or does she even, and at the same time too, does she even care that she knows that she has this power? Like,
no. Yeah. Can't wait to talk about her. She's so interesting. Okay. So he says, that got very long. You don't have to read it all out. Of course I did. Do what thou wilt. Looking forward to the episode. Burger Will Halverson. Thank you so much for that interesting, excellent insight and letter. Please send us more letters. So this is a new one, and our second letter comes from us from first-time writer Krista. This just excited me so much when I saw this come in. Hey, Nevers family. This isn't related to the Nevers, but I hope you respond to it anyway. It seems to me that the divide amongst horror fans comes down to how one defines the word horror. For example, I loved The Witch, but when I was leaving the film, I overheard people remarking that it wasn't scary and they never jumped once. I think people forget that horror is a broad term. Thoughts? Krista. So Jess, as I'm the resident horror fan of the Nevers podcast, and you are my guest, also a big horror fan, please, we'll start with your response to that letter.
So my response to this letter is, you're right. And this person's right, that horror is not... And I think I fell into this category once before where I thought, okay, well, like a horror movie has to scare me. I have to feel like that adrenaline feeling of feeling scared. I need to like wrap myself in a blanket and like jump and stuff like that. But over the years, I've learned that horror is just the truth in your face. And sometimes it is uncomfortable and it makes you feel uncomfortable. And it makes you think about some of the realities in the world that we don't necessarily always think about every other day. So I don't think it necessarily has to be a horror movie has to be scary. I think it can be thought-provoking, and I think it needs to make you feel uncomfortable, and it needs to make you start looking at things in society in a different way and address it as you can. And that's where like I come from, and that's why I love the horror genre so much. I also love the horror films that make me scared and also like are just there for pure entertainment value and make me feel uncomfortable.
Okay, thank you. So for me, as a 25-year horror fan, Krista, I understand your, I'm going to assume, maybe frustration at these types of remarks. Horror, just like any other genre, it's an art form. How you respond to it is going to be different. Everybody's going to respond differently to it. They're going to respond differently to it. It is subjective. Feelings and emotions are subjective. So yeah, everybody's going to respond differently to a horror film. Probably to some people, The Witch scared the crap out of them. It didn't scare me, but it made me feel very uneasy at certain points. And I love that movie. It's one of my favorite horror films. I always go back to the definition of horror, and it's an intense feeling of fear, shock, or disgust. And how that's going to relate to everyone is going to be so different. You know, some people might have been super shocked by The Witch. Maybe they were disgusted. Maybe it actually scared them. But it doesn't make it any less of a horror film. So horror isn't all about necessarily being scary, being jump scares. Jump scares are a cinematic tactic. That is not the essence of horror. That is just one small piece of the horror puzzle when you're putting together an actual film. Horror films are created to, they create an atmosphere of a sense of dread and unease. Yes, maybe that adrenaline. But again, everybody's going to respond to it very differently. For me, if I hear something like that, I don't really try to engage with people because I just feel like it's such a bold claim that this isn't horror because yada, yada. They just don't understand the subjectivity of their own claims.
Very well put.
Thank you. That's my thoughts on that. Thank you for the horror-specific related question. It warms my black heart. So thank you so much. Okay, everyone. That is the end of part 1 of the Monstrous Women of Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Please remember to subscribe to the Nevers podcast and rate us on Apple Podcasts. That'll really help us out. Leave us a review, share us, please do so. Find us on hbothenevers.com as well as Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at hbothenevers. Thank you very much, Gina.
Thank you, guys. You guys are awesome.
And Jess. Thank you so much for coming on this episode of The Nevers.
Thank you for having me. I had a great time.
I loved having you on here. It was a different dynamic, but it was so amazing. And you're super smart, and I love having you on here.
Oh, thank you.
So would you like to share, plug your projects and your social media where people can find you?
Well, people can find me over at the Spinsters of Horror. So on our social media, and Kelly's probably going to, tell me that I got it wrong. You can find me on Instagram at Spinsters of Horror and our Twitter account at Horror Spinsters, as well as I have my own personal accounts, which are at SpectralJess07 on Twitter and also on Instagram. And you can also find me on Facebook under the Spinsters of Horror page. And keep an eye out for our next episode, which will be about the coming-of-age horror, which will be all about the film Teeth.
Excellent.
Talk about more female monstrosities.
Yes.
So my social media is at Gina Gemini. Gemini is spelled with an E in the middle, Gemeni. So feel free to tweet me or Instagram me or any of that stuff.
And for me, of course, you can find me on The Nevers Podcast, HBOthenevers.com. I write articles for the website. I am now curating and producing some episodes like this one. So please let me know what you thought of it. And if you'd like to see more, what you liked, you didn't like. Yes, spinstersofhorror.com is my other project's website. I myself on Twitter, you can find me at @KGredner. And we'll see you next time on The Nevers Podcast. That's it.
This episode of the Nevers Podcast was edited by Matthew Yamanashi. The intro and outro music was produced by Guilherme Moraes. We are more than just a podcast. We're a fan community. You can keep up to date on the Nevers and chat with other fans by visiting HBOthenevers.com. You can also follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. Just search HBO The Nevers, all one word, and click that follow button. The Nevers Podcast is not endorsed by Mutant Enemy, Warner Media Entertainment, or any of its subsidiaries, including Home Box Office, HBO, and is intended for entertainment and educational purposes only. The Nevers and all names, pictures, and audio clips are registered trademarks and/or copyrights of their respective copyright holders.